did that. I had an affair. I ended up losing my family over that affair. I lost my businesses over that affair. I went into bankruptcy, and I accept and I own all that. But it wasn't until damn near 5 years ago, we're talking very recently in my life, where I started to kind of like sit down and evaluate all of the things that have happened in my life and go, okay, either one, I'm just a bad person and I continue to make mistakes, or two, maybe there's some things I need to try and unravel. It's like a ball of Christmas lights. If I can unravel this ball of Christmas lights, the ultimate thing that I want, and I've told this to my kids, I just want my kids to stop the cycle.
What's up, young scholars? It's the damn cycle.
Because my son has come to me, and my son, he's 23, and he's like, look, you know, he and I reacquainted and started to get back on track. He was probably 14 or 15. He went to the University of Missouri. So for the past 4 years, I've had him in close proximity. And so, like, I'm trying to be a better dad. I'm trying to, you know, take him out and take him to dinner and do things with him. And there's always been this little disconnect. He's gotten closer to me, but I've always felt like there's this little wedge. And I couldn't understand, like, well, maybe the wedge is that I haven't been there for 13 years. But then he calls me a month ago and he says, I decided to go to therapy. And while I was in therapy, some things came out. And he goes, I need to tell you this. I was terrified of you as a kid. And I'm thinking to myself, I was only there for 10 years and I don't remember being nearly as hard on you as my dad was on. Holy shit, I'm saying the same thing. And I went, son, I'm really sorry that I started to go down that road. I'm going to shut up now. I want you to tell me whatever you were going to say. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. And so he tells me, you know, I was scared of you when I was a kid. I was scared you were so big and you had the tattoos and you were loud and you would spank me and then you were gone. And so then, like, when I was forced to come see you for Christmas, I was scared, you know, I didn't know. And I'm thinking to myself, I literally put my kid in the same exact situation. And I got defensive, just like my dad got defensive. So I'm at a point now, you were like, well, kudos to you for looking at things and breaking them down. You know what, man? I don't have to be right. And I don't care what happens to my legacy when I die. All I want is for my kids to say, you know what? We're not doing that shit anymore. And then maybe for the next 10 generations, they can have normal family time, normal upbringing. And none of this is to bash my family. They didn't know any better. They didn't go see anybody. They didn't talk to anybody, you know? So,
a lot of us, people of color, have dealt with adverse childhood experiences. And unfortunately, it gets passed from one generation to the next through transgenerational trauma, because most of the time, mental health is a recent phenomenon. You know, with, you know, in our age group, if you sought mental health, it was a stigma attached because Jesus was supposed to fix all the problems, you know, and that sort of thing. You know, but I would say, you know, the thing that, you know, that you did that I like is the fact that you allowed your child to share their moment. And I think a lot of times we as dads are so busy being defensive that we really need to take in, you know, what our kids are saying, because like you, I was abusive to my kids too. It was, you know, the thing is, you feel like you're doing the only thing that you could do is what you have been taught, unless something massive comes in and alter that. Now, for me, I didn't have that father figure, but, you know, my grandmother was Jim Crow. You know, she grew up in Jim Crow, and it was like, I'm going to beat you before the police beat you, that sort of mentality. And, you know, and I even understand where Kirk Franklin is coming from when he was like, let me do it's, you know, it's something in us, and that's really that trauma and not really being healed from it. But I would say the thing that we can do is really just own it. And I personally, like with my daughter and that sort of thing, I talked to her and I was like, whenever you relive those moments where I was the frightening boogeyman or the monster that I created, I want you to know that I'm going to be with you and I'm going to stand with you, even though it's me. And I'm going to try to help you. And I hope by my being there, that will slay some of, the monster that I had within me. Because to be honest, what you described in Damian is the fact that you just didn't have the tools. And you're a young 19-year-old father. I can't imagine you just didn't have the tools in the toolbox. But the fact that you're willing to do that now is something, that will change generations. I remember I was at this fatherhood conference, listening to this one scholar, and he said, all it takes is one father to change 5 generations after him.
Oh my God, I totally agree.
So when you talk about your legacy, you actually are changing your legacy now because you recognize the fault in it. And at least you're able to have those conversations. With that being said, and I want to shift gears to my next question and just want to look at it. What do you think that society doesn't understand as the biggest challenge that fathers of color face? What would you say is the biggest challenge that we face as dads?
Well, society in terms of who? Like, are we talking about the system or are we just talking about people in general? Are we talking about the kids?
Let's say mainstream American society, how, because, a lot of times when I do Dad Cypher, a lot of people will say, well, what's the difference between what white dads go through or Hispanic dads go through or then Black dads? And I always say that it is a specific set of challenges that one face when you are a dad of color. For one, it's the historic trauma. For two, you have, governmental systems that has been placed that even if your father, systematically wasn't removed, like a lot of leaders, like we can look at Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, people that served as sort of surrogate father figures have been systematically removed. So in terms, when you talk about fatherhood, it's going to have a different set of issues or problems that impact, men of color in a different way. Or do you even see?
Yeah, I think that I think that I have in my bulletproof vest. I can't get to it right now, but I have a little pen light that's no bigger than an ink pen. Okay, and it's pretty bright. It's an LED light. What people, I don't want to say fail to realize, because people understand the post-traumatic stress and the trauma of being Black in this country. They totally get it because they benefit from it. They don't want to give you the understanding that they understand it, because then the question comes, well, if you understand what I'm going through, why don't you change something? So it's easier to just, play dumb. But being Black and being a Black father, I don't think that there's necessarily much of a difference. But if you were to take the average white American male or any male who is not Black father and put them into a library, everything that they could ever want to learn about finance, about the world, about how to make themselves better, about how to build a home, to be an artist, anything. They're in the world's largest library and the lights are on. When you're Black, you're in that same library, but the lights are off. And if you're lucky, you get that little pen light. Now imagine searching a library the size of the Smithsonian. But the only thing that you have to guide you through is this tiny little pen light. How long would it take you to find the information that you need to be successful in finance, in building a home, in being a good parent? And that that understanding of just what it means to be Black in this country and the disadvantage that you're already in. You know, we're having this conversation about 3 generations back into slavery, and me having to navigate the 7-year-old kid dealing with a dad whose great grandfather was a fucking slave.
Wow.
Like, the fact that I even am at the point that I'm at now, socially functioning, all of us as Black men, we still somehow thrive as a people and make it. And we watch white society unravel at the thought of having to wear a mask in a costume. They're up in the Capitol with zip ties and AR-15s because the person that they wanted to win the election didn't win. We are dealing with 400 years of societal trauma in an entire year where, for the first time in history, everybody is admitting that there's a problem with police, admitting that there's a systemic issue with racism. But that's our existence. What isn't a part of our situation? You know? But I say all that, still say this. At the end of the day, all of that can be true. Everything that I just said can be true. But we still have a responsibility to handle our business and raise our kids. So what do? You have to find a way.
You know, you have involvement in law enforcement. You have the security guard channel. I'm pretty sure a lot of dads and moms out here too would probably know what should be the approach that what should we tell our kids on how to interact with law enforcement? What advice would you give about, you know, Black boys and Black girls interacting with law enforcement? What would you suggest?
The company that I work for, 99.9% of the guys that work there are former law enforcement. They've served as military police, they've served as sheriff's deputies, or they've worked as prison guards. So, you know, it's very pro blue line. Okay. Now, if I were having a conversation with them and brought up the fact that, for Black children of any age, they have to be debriefed or trained or spoken to in any terms differently than anyone else, they would probably find that laughable. They would find it offensive. They would say that I'm crazy.